Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday gathering at the storehouse. Glad to be here once again. Glad to have you listening. Tony's with me today. Good morning, Tone.
Hey, Dad.
And the topic today is going to be ISIS. Awful lot going on with these people. And Tony, you've been reading some stuff on that. Why don't you clue us in?
Sure. I've just been, reading some of the mainstream propaganda to see what they want Americans to believe. And so the one that I think is the most important with this going on in Saudi Arabia now, because we know from the prophecy that's one of the first places affected. So this article by Alistair Crook, who former MI6 agent, author, Resistance, the Essence of Islamic Revolution. So what I'm finding in general from these articles is all the mass propaganda, as it's always been. Go back to World War I, World War II, propaganda is the way that they do it. So the mass propaganda by these so-called, experts in their field do nothing more than confirm rather than give us the real lowdown, point out what I'm trying to show, that ISIS is simply a proxy installation. It's just a appendage of our secret government doing what we need to do, which is destabilize the region. I guess what I'm trying to point out is you've got eschatologists like us, and on the other side, who are looking at it, he's looking at it from the point of view of the Quran. So we're both reading our own scriptures and interpreting the evidence of history relevant to our eschatology in our own independent way. And we're coming up with this schism in Islam being created on purpose to further a Zionist agenda, and that can be substantiated in history by who the bankers are, who they've been funding, what the real historical evidence is versus the story on the surface. And so that's what I'm always trying to, use this time in your show to point out to listeners that you need to have those spectacles on, what we used to call Daniel's glasses, because we're looking for this unsealing of Daniel's prophecy many years ago, and realizing that if we conform everything to the idea that it has to fit Daniel, if this is the end time, well, then you see the world through Daniel's glasses. And so now if you want to see how that's coming to be and how to watch for the rapture and the end times and the 7-year covenant and the rise of the Antichrist, well, you can't just be reading these news things as if this is real. Oh, ISIS is a real entity of, yeah, they're a real entity, but how did they, that's what I want to look at today. These 3 articles really clued me in to the wag the dog nature of it all, with these very important people ignoring all the really pertinent questions in this. This article is a pretty long one that's supposed to take you deep into this old conflict that, funny enough, brings you back to an English into the 20s and even teens, through an Englishman, an English, that was before the CIA, but as I say, one of that day, Philly, I think his name was, if I remember the article correctly, and he's the one that instilled the Wahhabi religion in Saudi Arabia. Now, they don't point that out as being an installation officially. It's like, oh, geez, this is what came about. And this guy that he put in charge turns out to be this Wahhabi. And now it's from, now what this article is here to show us is that it's from this strain, this crazy Wahhabi strain, and it took over way back in the 20s by some accident of fate through this Englishman, funny enough. In other words, through the hands of the friggin' English in there. Yeah, it was probably a real accident. We look at it through everything else we've been talking about with the Zionistic movement and the beginning of World War I and the funding of the Bolshevik Revolution and the killing of the Russians and the upending of the Ottoman Empire, and yeah, all these things I'm sure were quite by accident. But, used the English world to fund and get behind what became the Wahhabism in the Saud. It was the son was Saud of this first leader. And that's where this ruling family comes from. So yes, it doesn't quite give us the reality that it was set up. Um, they blame it on a idealistic Puritan proselytizing formulation by al-Wahhab that was father to the entire Saudi project. And so this is what what brought what they're calling this gene, this that it's got this gene in it, and so it's birthed this natural offspring called ISIS now, and the reason they want Saudi Arabia because it's their homeland, it's where they come from, and it's where their Wahhabi ideals descend from. So they're setting it up as an inevitable clash. And that's what I was trying to say last week when I saw what was going on there. Do they just want to make headlines? No. They have to spread from north to south. They have to be such a threat that's where the Antichrist, the false deliverer, goes first to liberate the oiliest region.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, this is the first important article, is that this Huffington Post is trying to go into great depth by this very, must be knowledgeable. This guy's a former MI6 agent. We don't know whether all he did was run for sandwiches in Saudi Arabia or what, but he was a former MI6 agent and author of, some obvious mouthpiece book. Resistance, the Essence of Islamic Revolution. Okay, so here he is now in his article, compared to most of the next thing I'm going to go to, this ridiculous, the BBC with its typical American style, aimed at America, aimed at the masses, soundbite reality. Here's an article about one of the heaviest issues of our time, and it's in 300 words or 500 words. The kind of thing you'd ask a 12-year-old to do in class, and produce that much information on it. And so, but this one's supposed to be an in-depth look at how this, that there's just no helping the fact, which is what I was saying last week, that ISIS is going after Saudi Arabia. They don't just want to disrupt it. They feel a kinship to it that can't be denied. And so that's the first article that tells us, okay, watch out, ISIS is expanding to Saudi Arabia. And again, when you consider the American interest, and they talk in there about a little bit, they try and explain away how it could possibly be that Saudis are alleged to fund this, but it certainly couldn't be the government, because these people want the government. It's just absurd to not point out the American interest in maintaining Saudi Arabia in the allied position that it's in, no matter how many people within the country believe in their ideology or not, because that's what this is trying to point out, that they can't help but the fact that many people in the country will be sympathetic to these people, because the very gene of their whole ideology was birthed in this al-Wahhabism, which of course most of the people of Saudi Arabia are actually against. It's so misrepresented when you know the truth. So, but if you can read in it some of their headlines. I'll just read quickly some of the stuff they have in bold print because it feeds into all we're talking about. The very top of it says this article is part 2 of Alistair Crook's historical analysis of the roots of ISIS and its impact on the future of the Middle East. Read part 1 here, so you can go read the part 1. This is part 2. So after the first bit, there's a and again, it just immediately confirms that ISIS is real and powerful, and I want to talk about some of that today. I want to question. Why do I question that? If someone like this is selling it to me in this deep way, here's where it comes from, here's what's going on, how am I questioning it? Well, I'll get to some of the details here. So he says, quote, "We should understand that there is really almost nothing that the West can now do about it but sit and watch." Okay? Now, what have I been saying for 7 months? When they first started waving that flag, I said, why don't we just, what is this fake thing that we're talking about? Oh, there's some rebels. Oh, there's some, you mean we don't see what could happen? No, but we're in the position here a year or so later that he says we should understand that there's really almost nothing that the West can now do about it, but sit and watch. And when it says about what, it's that this ISIS is indeed, he says, a veritable time bomb inserted into the heart of the Middle East. And that's it. We're just not going to be able to do anything about it but sit and watch. Its real potential for destruction lies elsewhere in the implosion of Saudi Arabia as a foundation stone of the modern Middle East. Okay? So this is what he's claiming. And I say we're being given this as predictive programming. We're being told, here's what's going to happen. Now, we'll go down the article a little bit as he's explaining the history, and here's another bolded section. Quote, "Through its intentional adoption of this Wahhabist language, ISIS is knowingly lighting the fuse to a bigger regional explosion, one that has a very real possibility of being ignited, and if it should succeed, will change the Middle East decisively." And now, again, going back to the prophecy, this is what we're anticipating. This is what has to happen if Israel's to be threatened, if the whole world is to need to come to the aid now of this horrible presence. So this is what I've been anticipating. If you go back and look at my stuff, and here it is. So down the article a little further, after they give you some more of their twisted history, you get in bold again. In political and financial terms, the Saud Philby strategy, Philby, as I say, was that original Englishman. In political and financial terms, the Saud Philby strategy has been an astonishing success, but it was always rooted in British and American intellectual obtuseness. The refusal to see the dangerous gene within the Wahhabist project, its latent potential to mutate at any time back into its original, a bloody Puritan strain. In any event, this has just happened. ISIS is it, right? So again, they're presenting it as, oh, geez, we just didn't see it coming. And I'm presenting it as, the history seems to see these guys were making everything happen with their money from 40 years before this Philby went in there, all the way back in the 1880s when they were setting up the Ottoman Empire, setting up Russia, setting up for the First World War. They already had their strategy. They already knew they wanted the promised land, the Zionists, and they want it from the Euphrates to the Tigris. They want it all. And so this, when you look at it through those lenses, you see what kind of twisted wag the dog version this is. Oh, geez, but or you have to believe he's right. And we just didn't see all this 100 years of espionage, right? 60 years of CIA. We know from the history that's been released. I mean, we've worked on, MK Ultra, like brainwashing people. We've tested nuclear stuff on our own people and others. We've tested nuclear bombs and other weapons, biological weapons, different kind of. We know this is our history. We've been controlling the weather. We have all sorts of evidence of what we've been up to. Leaders we've assassinated around the world. Indiende in Chile, and there's just, the list goes on and on. Really, the people we've put in power, like Noriega, and then took out of power, supported like the Marcos in the Philippines, and then removed him. We've been doing this all along. So to think that in an area so important to us, that we have, through the money that's been going into this project, on however you want to see it, the bankers have been funding the Zionist movement since the Balfour Declaration, and then the establishment of the State of Israel. They paid to get the Jews to send them back to Israel so that they'd go there, so that when they set up the state, there would be people there. So when you consider the money that's gone into all of that, to imagine that this same group of people has just been blind, knowing that they put this this regime. So I say that when you look at it from the standpoint that they always knew they were going to have to pull the trigger to start the war to kill all those Arabs to get that land, well, they were planting the seed in Wahhabism that could become ISIS whenever they needed it to be. They've already got that strain, just like in Christianity, like this poor son of a gun that I was listening to last night and this morning, that we got into a little back and forth on his YouTube channel, because he's another one calling for the Antichrist out of Rome. He's going to be the Pope. He's going to be Obama. He's going to be a European leader with a European Union that's going to bring a peace covenant, because Daniel says he'll confirm a peace with many. And so no, he doesn't. He says he'll confirm a covenant with many for a week. Now, what covenant? Who's that got to do with, and for what purpose? Do your history. What are they trying to obtain? Right? The Jews need a temple. They don't have their temple on Temple Mount. They want all that land. They want security. They're waiting for a Messiah to come. They've had their blood moons. They've got the Jubilee. They know it is the time for their Messiah. This is what's coming. The covenant has to do with that, not some anti-Christian movement, not some kill all the Christians, mark all the Christians, destroy the Christians. That's not what the end time's about. That just happens to be, they just get in the way like they're just another one whose voice is the most offensive in that time. So yes, the Christians will be persecuted. The Christians will be destroyed in every kind of way that is possible. That doesn't mean they're going to be hunting them down. It just means while we live through it, they'll make more and more things illegal. I mean, if you live in Canada and America, and I don't know, there's still anything left of it, they'll just keep making more and more stuff illegal. They don't have to go in and threaten you to kill you. They're already doing it. In California now, your kids have to get vaccinated, or you can't send them to school. And guess what? You have to send them to school. It's just like you have to get a bank account to cash your check. And guess what? You can't get anything but a check from your job. So they can't pay you in cash, and you can't get your cash unless you have a bank account. So your freedom is to go get a bank account. Your freedom is to go get inoculated with their vaccines. And soon your freedom will be to go get a chip put in you with a number, so that you can be, they can cut you off at any time, and you can't ever rise against them. You can never amass any wealth or any power that they can't immediately take from you, because everything you do will come down to a moment-to-moment use of your chip. I mean, that's their idea. They never get to it, but when the people, these type of Christians that I was arguing with today, they're looking for an antichrist to come and force that on the world, like that's the big purpose. But that's not the purpose of the antichrist. And again, to bring in my brothers and sisters on the other side of the world, the Muslims, who are also waiting for Jesus to return, who are also waiting for a false deliverer of the Jews, they see that same thing, that the false deliverer of the Jews is setting the Arabs up to be slaughtered. And so, because the false deliverer of the Jews has to rule the world from Jerusalem the way the Messiah is prophesied that he's going to do. So if the false Messiah is going to be the stand-in for the true Messiah, the false Messiah has to rule the world from Jerusalem. So that's what's really going on. And when we try and fit history into all of our prophecy, you've got to realize we're looking at a history, especially in the last 100 years, from the Balfour Declaration, in which the spirit of the false Messiah is trying to set up his kingdom, what the Christians call the Antichrist kingdom, but falsely believe is some Roman union that's going to rule the world and destroy Christianity and make everyone take a mark. And no, these are just part of the world that's coming, a world that's coming over there to the Jews. This is all going to happen to the Jews, not the Americans, unless you're living in Jerusalem. This is what goes on between the Muslims and the Jews in that final conflict, and what the Jews are put through. Because remember now, when this brings in the story of who are these Jews? Is this the God's people, as we've been talking about? No, it's not. They're not God's people by blood. They might be God's people in the sense that once you claim to be a Jew and adopt God's law, but that's the key, isn't it? Adopt God's law. See, and these people didn't adopt the law of Moses, apparently, at least not in Jesus' eyes, and not in a lot of historians' eyes today, not in the Hasidic Jews of today that stick with the law of Moses. They point out that the mainstream Jewish movement is this movement of the Talmud, which is a collection of essentially traditions that the priests have determined are implied by Moses' law. So, and I find that the parallel to the Christian church, as I'm always trying to bring attention to, especially in our Bible study, that's what is the sense of the Laodicean church, that we've done the same thing. We're essentially walking around with a Talmud under our arm instead of the law of Moses. We're not living the law of Jesus Christ and his command, love one another the way I've loved you. We're living some ritualized, paganized, hypocritical, twisted version that we call, that I recognize Jesus calling the Laodicean age of the church. The connection between the Talmudic oppression of the Jews today and the Laodicean church age is to bring attention then to who then is this Christianity that's subject to what? And now Jesus says of the Laodicean church, I'll spit you out of my mouth. I don't think that means hell. I just think that means the sort of rejection of their expression of Christianity. I don't. Jesus is saying, I don't. Just because you use my name, you don't love each other. You live in this, you're like the person I was arguing with today. He thinks that if Israel was a nation ruled by the Lord Jesus Christ, they would bomb Iran's nuclear facilities and destroy them because that's what the Lord says he's going to do. Wow. So when did we have the right to take judgment into our own hands and vengeance into our own hands, and we're going to carry it out to the Lord? I don't remember the Lord giving us the order just because he claimed he was going to do it. The command Jesus gave us was love one another. So I see that we're so far away as how it's easy for me to see that he classifies Christianity as thinking they're rich, but being poor and naked and wretched and miserable. And they're that way because in their spirit, they're ready to go kill their brothers and sisters in the name of Jesus. He can't condone that. So he spits that out of his mouth. But does that mean hell? Of course not. These people are all saved. They believe in Jesus. They're just they're just children that have been misled. But this persecution of the Christians, this now comes from this false expression of Judaism, who is about to claim a different Messiah. They're going to find this worldly Messiah in arms, one that they're even bringing into being, if we can even breach our ideas to go that far. That it's not like some surprise where they're waiting and then, oh Lord, here we go, here's the Messiah. No, they've been creating the situation so that they can name the Messiah who they've already chosen. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I see that it seems more like that now on the Dajjal side, the Antichrist side, the spirit of Antichrist that is already at work. What is the spirit of Antichrist? It's not the spirit of anti-Christianity. It's the spirit of the not deliverer of Jesus. I mean, of the Jews. Not Jesus, because he's not the deliverer. He's not the Messiah. Jesus was the Messiah. And that's why John can say anyone who denies Jesus is the Messiah, that's the Antichrist, because that's what it's going to come down to in the end, a false Messiah. And the Jewish nation is going to say, this is the Messiah. Now, who's that going to go in conflict with? The Christians in America? No. Most of them, I think, the Laodicean church, are going to be all for this new Messiah. They're going to be the ones that are really on the fence now. Maybe Jesus is Jesus for the Christians, and this is the Messiah to the Jews. That's how it really is. I mean, I don't know, but that's how confused Christianity seems to me. Because if they're going to freak out, if the Jews say, "Oh, well, here's our Messiah. It wasn't Jesus." Well, what do you think they're saying, Christians? Why are we on the side of Zionism? Why are we so against the Muslims who are waiting for not only an Antichrist, but Jesus to return a second time? Why are they our enemies and the Zionists are what we support? Or we think those are our friends. That's the alliance we as Christians, we got to protect Israel. Why exactly? They're the ones waiting for someone other than Jesus. So to me, it's really that the crux of it for a Christian. I mean, think about it. It's that upside down. And so now let's get back to our articles, which to me fit this. They're upside down. If you go ahead and imagine everything you read is them presenting the ceiling to you as if it was the floor. So that you're walking around on the ceiling thinking you're walking around on the floor. No wonder you don't see the furniture the way it is, in its reality. So let's leave this Huffington Post article for a second. I think that was all they're bolded. No, one more bolded piece here. A couple of more. So let's go back to this article. Quote, the key political question is whether the simple fact of ISIS's successes and the full manifestation, flowering, of all the original pieties and vanguardism of the archetypal impulse will stimulate and activate the dissenter gene within the Saudi kingdom. If it does, and Saudi Arabia is engulfed by the ISIS fervor, the Gulf will never be the same again. Saudi Arabia will deconstruct, and the Middle East will be unrecognizable. Now, I'm sorry, but you go back to your history and you go look at a few videos of what the people were saying all the way back from the 70s, Carter administration, and then Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski. You go see what these people said, and you tell me that we would have ever allowed anything like this to even be possible. We haven't for 100 years. You don't think we've been putting down dissidents? So it's absurd to me. I'm back to this one. I read this and I thought, oh my gosh, absurd. Saudi Arabia is going to be engulfed in ISIS fervor. So when Egypt was engulfed in Muslim Brotherhood fervor, we put the Muslim Brotherhood down and installed Mubarak, and he reigned for 25 years or something. Right when Iraq was potentially engulfed in Shia fervor, or may have been overrun by Shia fervor from Iran and Saudi Arabia, well, we installed a man named Saddam Hussein to destroy any possibility that any Shia strongholds would take hold in Iraq. And in fact, we sent him with our guns to war to kill both, Shias and Sunnis in the Iraq-Iran war. Before then, feeling, once he had control of his country, he didn't have any Shia problem there. I mean, you had just the problem of the Shias crying, oppression, which apparently was our goal since we funded him and gave him all the guns and told him to oppress the Shias. So then we had to go in and uproot him, which has resulted in complete destabilization. So what's so funny is we put the regimes in there that have kept everything stable. What makes you think that we don't pull the regimes out and do the destabilizing ourselves? And so for this guy to not bring any of that up, simply point out the key it's like all of a sudden as if all this stuff has just happened. It's all just fallen out of the sky in the last 18 months. This whole new world of ISIS, and just nobody saw it coming. Nobody talks about where it came from or what the connections that go back, where the money has been all these years. We just take it on like it's suddenly today the ISIS fervor. If it does, and Saudi Arabia is engulfed by the ISIS fervor, the Gulf will never be the same again. The Gulf will never, as if we just accept, let's not talk about what we would do in that, with that possibility before us, because we had it in the 60s and 70s, and we know what we did. We went and we put our hand in every regime in the region that we could get our hands on, which was all of them. And we infiltrated, with our money and our guns and our leverage, everyone in the Middle East, because the one thing we could never have allowed, as we said for 50 years, was deconstruct the Middle East and being unrecognizable. Come on. So anyway, that's it. But here we are. Just like I've been saying, this is what they have to bring it to, this wag the dog world. We've got to all be so scared of ISIS that there's only one answer. We got to take them on, but they're tacticians. Nobody knows how to do it. But the King of Jordan, the good king, we can fund him and he'll go out and fight them for the world. So, anyway, this is what I see coming out of the Huffington Post. Now let's go over to the BBC's mouthpiece, which is, as I say, it's just your short little blurbs of complete absurd soundbite. How do you even call it news? How do you even call it anything? But this is just here to tell us that, to verify that these guys are for real. Baghdadi's their leader, brutal reputation when they took control. Their conquest of Mosul sent shockwaves around the world. This is what I love here in this from this article. Initially, I have to laugh. I mean, this whole article is almost worth reading because it's only like, I say 300 words, 500 words, and they're all just like, I can just see them sitting around writing it like you're trying to write a fictional, story to fill a need. The U.S. said the fall of Iraq's second city posed a threat to the entire region. Now this is going back, of course, to last year, so we wouldn't do anything about it but sit back. A threat to the entire region. It may have also made ISIS the most cash-rich militant group in the world. I mean, can you imagine? Those guys in the PLO have been raising money legitimately from governments and people all over the world for, most of my life. So many of these other Hezbollah and Hamas, I mean, these people have had support from countries. But no, it may, they conquered a second city. Oh my gosh. And of course, what do the pictures show? Some area that looks to me like, it's got that overpass thing that's like when you pass between cities or states in Mexico, to America, if you pass through, way out in some, near Arizona or Texas, where there isn't a big city, you pass through these areas where look like agricultural inspection stations just over the border, and it's just sort of an overpass thing with signs that say stop, and you stop there and show. And it's funny, cars are just coming through one side. There's a burned up car with kids who look, fairly well dressed and healthy, nourished. They don't look like they're running from war. There's big black smoke in the background, which, I don't know, it almost looks like Hawaii when they're burning the cane. Who knows? Cars driving through. It's obviously not a war zone, but a car is blown up there. But this is our, Iraqi security. This is the label under the photo. Iraqi security forces fled as IS advanced into the city of Mosul. So yeah, this is, as I said, okay. So this is what it looks like everywhere. Probably built by the same corporations. This is an overpass, a little area where you're coming into a city or in crossing a state line, and so they're presenting this as, I love the photos they present. Where's the great fight that would really instill in me this feeling that, wow, tens of thousands of people clashed and a city fell into the hands of rebels, Instead, I get a picture of two kids playing with a blown up car. So anyway, and it may also have made ISIS the most cash-rich militant group in the world initially. The group relied on donations from wealthy individuals in Gulf Arab states, particularly Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, who supported its fight against President Bashar al-Assad. So we're to assume then that we allowed this greatest threat in the Middle Eastern destabilization ever, that's threatening now to deconstruct Saudi Arabia, our one ally. And it originally was funded by Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. It says right here. Well, as far as I know, those are both our allies. So we were funding them to fight Assad, not realizing that they would get so big and awful. And now, because of this funding, they were richer than they got richer than the PLO, they got richer than Hezbollah, they got richer than Hamas. I don't get it. Nobody could have cut off that money and said, well, wait a minute, these guys are kind of crazy. Wait a minute, we can see some of what they're declaring their aims are. Wait a minute, this might not be, we can hire mercenaries to fight against Bashar al-Assad. We don't have to let these guys get funded. Let's talk to our friends in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and present the intelligence that, hey, wait a minute, this might not be a good idea. Come on. So now let's go on to the next sentence. Today, he's claiming, BBC's claiming, IS is said to earn significant amounts from the oil fields it controls in eastern Syria, reportedly selling some of the supply back to the Syrian government. It is also believed to have been selling looted antiquities from historical sites. And then Professor Newman believes that before the capture of Mosul in June 2014, IS had cash and assets worth about $900 million. Afterwards, this rose to around $2 billion. So this is very interesting that, again, thinking that maybe we have some intelligence in the world and that money is what we need, and that we're watching them funded by our, allies, and then that capturing Mosul in June 2014, not so long ago, and certainly after we'd known that these guys were around and what some of their goals were. Geez, we might have, you think nobody knew that? Geez, if they capture Mosul, they're going to double their money. They're going to have a lot more money. Okay, so, and then we're allowing, we can put sanctions on the whole legitimate country of Iran or Iraq or Libya and not let them sell oil to anybody, not let them move. We can put no-fly zones. We can put sanctions on food and cripple. We caused 2 million deaths in Iraq with our sanctions. But no, ISIS, well, now that they've got control of oil fields, which I say, yeah, that's what we would have done. We'd have said, geez, what do they need, this little band of rebels? Well, they're going to need some money. Well, who are they going to get it from? Well, these kind of people over here and private individuals in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Well, geez, maybe we should send some pressure to talk to those individuals. And then, geez, what are they going to go after with that money? Well, things like Mosul and oil fields. Oh, well, maybe we should get some presence there ahead of time so that they can't take those assets and grow. Come on. It's absurd that we're playing catch up as if in that region we haven't had interest enough that we would never have let this happen. I'm hoping I can read here within this ridiculous article. They talk about how well funded now and how they have so much their weaponry. I mean, these guys are just, apparently they have immense amount of weaponry. And I'm wondering, okay, so and where'd they get that? I mean, they haven't been a big bad people for that long. We just found out that they've been getting private funding. I mean, it's only June last year. Since when? Who sold them all? Where are they getting all this weaponry? Everybody's against them. Is Saudi Arabia selling it to them? Is Syria selling it to them so they can fight Syria? Is Jordan selling it to them, who's our ally with weapons over there? Is Israel selling it to them? I mean, who's selling them this weapon? Do they have weapons making facilities suddenly that we don't know about? I mean, it's the stories are absolutely absurd. I'm trying to find this. I hope it's in the next article, but I read that and I just almost fell over. Where are they getting all the weapons? You know, who's funding all this growth that the whole world is afraid of? So anyway, that's how you know, people, that we're watching something happen on purpose. And if these guys were that bad, they'd have been cut off so fast. They would have just been limited immediately and cut off. So what it shows you, and maybe it's this next article that points it out, or perhaps I missed that point. And one of the points I was thinking reading these articles is how obvious it is to me now that what I was saying almost a year ago during the uprootings, when it dawned on me before ISIS, we're uprooting all these countries to make way for whatever the bad thing is that's coming that we have to get rid of. Go back and listen to what I was saying, and then compare it to what the pundits that you watch and are believing every day in your newspapers and your New York Times. And go back a year and see what they were saying about the Arab Spring a couple of years ago, right? And all the democracy that we were fighting for, all the democracy, the people were standing up, and there was bound to be democracy and Libyans, and we had to help Libyans, right? And what was I saying? No, we're spending 12 years to do what Daniel saw in his prophecy, uproot 3 forms, nations, leaders, and all of their support system. And why would we do that? Well, we're obviously making way for some other kind of leadership, some other kind of power paradigm to come into the vacuum of that. And I was saying from way back then, we must know what it is. In fact, not only we must know, we must be funding the one that we want to take power, because we're not that stupid. It's how we do things in our it's what we spend our money on. It's the reason we run heroin and opium and cocaine, and it's the reason we develop crack and meth and ice as a nation, as a dark government, so that we have the money to do these things, to kill people, to kill the right people, and give money to the wrong people, so that the wrong people can become the right people we need to kill in the future. And if you don't know that, you just don't know history, and I can't, really help you. I can't soothe your fears. I can only point out that everything you read has to be read through that lens. And so now here we have from Brookings, another supposed, Middle East politics and policy. This is some of your really Gregory Gause. This is F. Gregory Gause. He's another one of your mouthpieces, non-resident senior fellow in the Brookings Doha Center. He's professor of international affairs, head of international affairs department at the Bush School of Government and Public Service of Texas A&M University, author of 3 books, author of International Relations of the Persian Gulf, Cambridge University Press. So this guy's official. You don't get those credentials, and you don't get your book published by Cambridge if you're saying anything that isn't the official party line, one of the official party lines. And so the title of his piece is ISIS and the New Middle East Cold War. So, and his, as I remember, his article is about pointing out all the conflicting interests. And I think this is what I wanted to point out, how it's so impossible that since we've been aware of these and creating these conflicting interests, in order to keep down uprisings of other conflicting, it's the very reason we put Mubarak in place. We put Saddam Hussein in place. We supported Gaddafi for keeping the Muslim Brotherhood out of his country. We supported Iran, the Shoah in the beginning. There's a reason our hand's been in all these places. Jordan, there's a reason he gets the pen and the free trade agreement and all the weapons, right? So even Bashar al-Assad, if you go back a year or two, he was never on our high threat list. He was only because they say that money comes from Syria to Hezbollah. Well, yeah, of course it does. So that's all funneled. That's all set up and allowed to happen because just like the PLO and Yasser Arafat, when you do your history, these aren't just grassroots movements that threaten people. Because when that really happens, they stomp it out. You don't get to threaten the establishment. Try it in America, where we have a gut. I promise you, even right after 9/11, I used to think how they made this big thing about airports and you couldn't pull up close anymore, and there was all this stuff about airport security. Well, I was flying a lot back then, and what I noticed was all this supposed airport security was just simply adding a lot of very cheap labor. The kind of people you normally see standing at the door of Walmart, or the kind of people that look like they've just never done a job other than stand around. These were not sharp, educated people. I was flying a lot, all different airports, all over the country, and seeing these people that were checking me, and they looked like they just went and got them out of the food stamp line and say, "You guys want to make $5 an hour and stand there and look official?" And I never once felt like I did not have an opportunity to create terror if that was what I was there for. So I could see it. I mean, I lived in San Francisco, drove across the Golden Gate Bridge when we were on vigilant alert, and our vigilance was having like a Hummer with a few Marines standing there with their guns at the entrance to the bridge. And I thought, well, that's pretty impressive. I drive a panel van, which if it happened to be loaded top to bottom with explosives, none of that would have censored me. I could have driven right to the middle of the bridge, waited for one of those rush hour traffics when the traffic's hardly moving, so that the bridge is full of people and no one can even get out there and deal with the damage except by foot. I mean, I used to think, boy, I don't feel safe because of all these absurd laws and this absurd wag the dog. I feel safe because there's really no one coming to get us, because I know my history. And we set up all these terrorists. We do all the terrorism to keep it real in the world. So the history is really that we put the regimes there to keep the people who are now in power from having power. Then we took those regimes out over the last 12, 13 years and helped support that vacuum, so that these very people that we now call ISIS, are they people who are dangerous and want to kill? Yes, of course they are. They're the people we're funding. That's exactly who we want to get a certain amount of power. Don't think for a minute they'll ever get enough power. America threaten Israel or U.S. interests, actually, because they're mercenaries. They're all the kind of people that have that like they show in the science fiction movies, where they put the little plug in your arm or in your head, and if you go against them, they hit the button and it blows your head off. So no, they're all working for who they're working for, and they will terrorize as long as they're funded, and then as soon as the funding pulls back, those people will all fade back into the shadows who were paid to do the terrorism, and a bunch of the innocents will be killed that have been, called to the extremism. So anyway, that's what's really going on. And so this other article is, here to point out how many contradictory powers now have been set loose on each other, and how we're in this triangle. That's why they're calling it a Cold War, between the Kurdish interests and the Shia interests, and so to me it just keeps confirming what the Sheikh says. The Antichrist interest is Muslim civil war, Shia Sunni civil war. That's what has to come out of this. And so you can see that building now. ISIS has to be so right-wing, extreme, that it demands a left-wing response. And that will be the civil war, or at least that will be the context for which the two sides can take up sides in a civil war. because that's what they'll present it, just like the red and blue team in America. You really don't have, it's either, oh, do we want Obama or do we want Hillary? Not, okay, wait a minute, we're supposed to be putting both of those people in jail. And, why would you even offer me those two people? I mean, they're both criminals, and they've been, they're clearly, transparently criminals, treasonous criminals, not people who are looking out for, they have no right to run for president. Just because they have money doesn't give them the right to be my president. So, but that's all they're presented as. So this is what's going to happen over. It's the way you do it in the Hegelian dialectic. You give them the problem, you give them the thesis and antithesis, and out of that comes your solution, your synthesis, or your compromise. And so that's what they're going to give us now. And I'm still sticking with that story I've seen now for at least a year. That we're going to see ISIS grow to be this horrible threat. It has to become such a threat that the only answer is the other side, and the other side will be the left wing, the good king, the white horse king, that wants to make friends and peace with everybody, interpret the Quran differently, the opposite of the Wahhabism, and that will divide the people either right on some sort of Shia-Sunni, or at least will divide the Sunnis into a civil war, of which both of them have a conflict with the Shias. That remains to be seen. Or will this white horse be the one who's talking about Shia-Sunni? That will be the great things, part of the great things that this Messiah will speak, is that the Sunni and Shia should bind together to fight this extremist, because they're both, the Sunni and Shia, true believers, the Ummah, the believers of Allah, need to band together, both Sunni and Shia, and put their differences behind them to get this extremism out of there, and then work out their differences in a peaceable manner. I expect that that's the great thing that's coming that will make this person such a righteous leader. Is he's not going to fight the Shia. He's going to unite, to the best of his ability, the Shia on his side, and that's why he can go after Saudi Arabia, because they will have been recently taken over by ISIS. So anyway, if not taken over, under tremendous threat, it will be the same sort of wars and rumors of wars where, oh no, are they going to be able to stand? Oh no, it doesn't look like it. What's going to happen when Saudi Arabia falls? All of our worst nightmares. I mean, if you go back and listen to what I've been saying, Dad, months ago I was pointing out that we were going to get to this fever pitch of all these supposedly knowledgeable pundits talking about they were this great oh my gosh, what are we going to do in the Middle East now we've come to this, right?
Yeah.
This is what I was anticipating back when saying that. We remember, then we went through that period of strategic patience, or whatever the heck it was called, which meant not big enough yet. It's too obvious that we could wipe them out now, so we have to keep playing that, oh, well, okay, yeah, but wait a minute, oh, but geez, what do we do? Oh, but okay, now we can't afford to just go in there and do, hey, we don't want to upset, hey, what do we do? Let's think about what's best, as if we, it was our first day on the job, and nobody is familiar with any of these leaders, and yet the part of the BBC article here was to show you this, Baghdadi. Little is known about him, but it is believed he was born in Samarra, north of Baghdad, in 71. It's funny, I think I read to you guys, or we discussed months ago, an article that was quite in depth about who he is and how he rose to be the self-proclaimed caliph. Remember that?
Yep.
It was 5 times as many words as this article telling us little is known about him. The organization is led by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Little is known about him, except that he's just an extreme. We don't know where he comes from. We don't know who he is. Well, geez, that's not what you guys published, or somebody published several months ago. We seem to know all about him, where he came from, and why he has claimed.
It all goes to show that it's all obvious propaganda that's being published out there, and that really, after 35 years of watching this come to be, you know, uh, we are very fortunate in the fact that we really can see it because we put the time in to watch it develop, and we know the names of the players and when they did what, and so it all comes down to this is where we are, and the world doesn't want to hear it particularly because they're listening to other stories that seem to be plausible, and it captures their imagination.
Well, but it's to me, it's more than that. Seem to be plausible because of the very deep foundation. That's what we chip away at Bible study, and that's why I encourage people. I notice a lot more people are interested in the Middle East affairs, and of course they are. But it's because most people don't understand the Bible that they don't understand the Middle East so well, and the rise of the Antichrist kingdom, and the 666, and the Christians being persecuted, and all that. And I guess as a last word, Dad, I'll get back to that. So who are these Jews, these Christians that are going to be persecuted? Well, they're going to be these ones that are the actual children of Abraham, the real seed that are already oppressed in Israel by this group that is not of the blood. They're not the Sephardic Jews. They're this they call Khazars. They're European Jews that from the area of basically the Ukraine and Russia and Georgia of today, that converted to Judaism in their day, and they're the ones that have made this claim, that started this Zionist movement, made allies with the Catholics. Again, this strange alliance of people who are waiting for the Messiah, who they know is Jesus, and people who are um, decidedly waiting for another Messiah, not Jesus. And yet these people have an alliance to take back the Holy Land, so called, from the Arabs, who, and not only Arabs, but remember that at the time they're wanting to take it back from the Arabs 100 years ago, all the Jews that are of God's people that are living on that land, that have been there for generations, are just still living there. They don't have a state. It's not theirs. It's under an Arab rule, but the Arabs are quite copacetic with them. They're not fighting. They're allowed to live their life. They're their half brother, and they're allowed to live in peace next to their Arab brothers. That was all disrupted by this Zionist movement. Again, historically, it's quite easy to see the truth. It's funded by these European Jews, not these Jews that are of the bloodline. So now, come down to the end. Who declares Messiah? These people who are these European Jews. I say they may even be already know who it is, and they're just setting the kingdom up for the Messiah. Since they have the technology now to give this false prophet, who now can be your pope. There's he's not your Antichrist, but he could certainly be your false prophet to come and give, speak and make the image of this false Messiah speak and rain fire down from heaven to prove that God's power is with this person. Now, how the representative of Jesus can do that for the person who is the representative of the false, the other the one that's standing in the place of the Messiah, that's another Messiah. That's the part that still makes me wonder if the false prophet's not somebody else. The one they claim is the Mahdi is the false prophet, because that's the one that brings fire down from heaven in sight of all men to verify this deliverer of the Jews. That would make sense. I don't see how the representative of Jesus can do it, but that's what a twisted world we're in. That's how twisted the Catholics' version of it has become, as many Christians are pointing out, as they call the Pope the Antichrist. But of course, he can't be the false deliverer himself. He could be the false prophet. So what does that all lead to? Well, these Sephardic Jews that keep claiming, no, Jesus is the Messiah. No, Jesus came. No, Jesus brought people back from the dead. You guys missed it, right? Those people now stand to be persecuted. Those people stand to be told, hey, you either take this mark that we've decided comes from this Messiah, or we'll kill you. We'll imprison you. You see what I mean? It gives some real life imagery to that. Not out in America Obama's going to make a law that all Christians got to be killed. Come on, that kind of stuff is pure propaganda to scare us so we're not looking in the right place when all the reality is down. Because I think either it's either because of the problems through earthquake, electricity, I don't know. It's not going to be so easy to know that the dead have raised in Jerusalem. Although it doesn't make much of a warning if you don't hear that. So I feel that somehow, I mean, to me, I don't know, but I feel somehow everybody's going to get to know that it is claimed dead people raised from the graves, and that some Sephardic Jews are running around claiming that Jesus is going to return. I imagine that we're going to hear that because otherwise it's not much of a warning. But people aren't going to know what that means, and the mainstream, of course, is going to make that a laughing joke. People like Jon Stewart are going to be on TV making Christians laugh at that, is the way I see it. So that only the people who are truly waiting for that event, truly waiting for their Lord, like know He's coming and are waiting for the event. They're the ones are going to hear the call.
Especially when they know when that event is to take place because of the Jewish festivals.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, that's why people like us are watching, but then we're the ones that are going to be able to put explanation to the claim, you see. But that doesn't make anybody believe just because there's a few people like us out there going, "Hey, this is it. This is the kind of Jonah. This is the 40 days. Jesus is coming." I mean, they say that every day now on the internet. Jesus is coming every every feast of the trumpets for years now. So America, we're not going to be any more believable at that time, except that there is going to be a happening around which we're all going to get to at least make our decision. Oh, was that? And I say, the world's going to make that look ridiculous. And so that unless you really know what you're looking for, or you're really able to believe our story when we present it as the sign of Jonah fulfilled, it's the sign for those Sephardic Jews, is the way I see it. It's the sign for them that have been holding on to the sign of Moses because they were robbed of their Messiah the first time.
Right. I agree with that, and they're not waiting for him in the fall. They're waiting for him in the spring.
Well, not only that, one of their great rabbis says it's going to be Jesus.
Yeah.
And so they're going, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Is it going to be Jesus? I imagine there's a certain group that have to be. I mean, this guy's 100 years old. He's not some nobody. He's one of their great rabbis. He has a vision, claims it, says, I'm going to write it down, and a year after I die, you open it up. And then he also claims it's going to be after, what's his name?
Ariel Sharon.
Sharon dies. And so, come on, there's got to be at least a small group that's going, oh my goodness, this is kind of crazy. Old Yitzhak told us it was Jesus. He said that it was after Sharon died. What are we to, how are we to know that? Well, dead rise from the grave and said, Jesus, you don't think there's going to be a group of Jews now that have confirmation? Jesus is the Messiah. Aha! We've been waiting, we didn't know, and they're going to get the confirming words from those dead, whether it's Elijah, whether it's John the Baptist. I don't know who's going to raise, but somebody's going to convince them. I mean, that's the way to me. That's what Scripture says. That's who's waiting. That's who's going to get it. These Christians are the Laodiceans who are going to be spit out of his mouth because they're calling for war on their Muslim brothers because they're not only ignorant of obeying the command of Jesus to love your neighbor and love each other, but they're ignorant of the whole end time landscape through Daniel, through Revelation, that calls for the Jews to be persecuted for his name, not the Christians. The Christians are supposed to be children of the day and of the light, that day should not overtake you. You shouldn't be worried about being overtaken by the Antichrist. So why are you worried about all this anti-Christian movement? That's been going on since the very beginning, since they persecuted the first church. It's all been anti-Christian movement. That's not the Antichrist. The Antichrist is the one who denies Jesus is the Messiah, not the Savior of the world, the Messiah. That's what makes him the Christ. He's the Messiah. He's not just the Savior of the world. That's what God for the world, which is why it's so absurd that the people who believe that condemn the world. Because he didn't just save the world that knows Jesus. Those that know Jesus will never die. That's what he said. He didn't say everybody else will burn in hell forever. So anyway, that's my contribution this week, Dad.
Oh, thank you very much, Tony. I mean, that was very exciting. I hope you folks will really pass this one around to all your friends. And don't forget, go to our website, our channels on YouTube. That's the place to be. BroSal.org on YouTube, Philadelphian Church on YouTube, which will lead you to our two other sites that talk more about what's going on in the world and why. But these two sites, the Church of Philadelphia, or the Philadelphian Church, and BroSal.org, are going to bring you the information about the end times, our long watch that leads us to understand the rapture, and also where you can subscribe and continue to listen to us. We have several books that you can download that we've written over the years that make our point very well, actually. And we thank you for listening. We thank you for spreading this around. And remember, also there you can send your frankincense offering, which is what keeps us coming out to you. And for Tony, I'm Brother Sal. Until we see you again next week, we want you to have a great day.